Welcome back. Thank you for watching the VIFF Short Forum at the 40th edition of the Vancouver International Film Festival. My name is Curtis Woloschuk. I'm the Associate Director of Programming for the festival, and we're very excited to be joined by 5 filmmakers responsible for the work you've just seen. From Avoid, we have Dominique Van Olm. From Prometheus, Marie Farsi. From Heavy Petting, Brendan Prost. From the Blactor, Rukiya Bernard. And from Chocolate, Charlene Moore. Thank you all so much for joining us and spending a bit of time to talk a little bit more about the films that people have just seen. Dominique, your film feels like, in a sense, it feels like it's a film that was made for these times, or maybe even made during these times, and yet I think deals with some timeless themes of isolation and loneliness. Curious to know, I know you worked with a screenwriter on the film, but maybe just its genesis and when exactly this came to fruition for yourself, and you knew this was a film you wanted to make and a story you wanted to tell as a director.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we, the screenwriter Bryn Weeb and myself had been sort of working on a shared idea for a while, and so she started writing this story, and it took place in this concert hall in Toronto called the Great Hall, which was sort of our main inspiration, and we really sort of leaned into the emptiness and the void of the space, and then carried that through, and we started writing this in 2019, maybe even late 2018, so it was well before any of, like, you know, the COVID you know, came, and it's funny, as we were doing it, it just made sense. It was a sort of shared experience that we had felt at different times in our lives of feeling a bit anxious or alone and isolated, and how, you know, when you're going through phases of that in your life, sometimes it's easier to just wall yourself off from the world. And so we were like, wow, it makes so much sense to us, and it really did. And then when COVID came, we were like, oh, people are really going to get it now. Like, there is this, like, this feeling of alienation, you know, that we've all experienced in a way over the last year and a half. And so, yeah, it was sort of this preconceived idea before we knew shit was going to hit the fan, essentially.
Yeah, I think I wrote a note at some point where it's like, a void is a place, but it's also a feeling. And there is like a really strong sentiment that permeates the film throughout it, and a really rich atmosphere that's conjured.
Yeah, I would say, in addition to those two thoughts, a void is also an action, and or an inaction, perhaps, of trying to escape or not face what you need to. And it has a way of catching up with you, even if you try for it not to.
Marie, if I'm correct, Prometheus represents your first foray into filmmaking. You have a theater background, and perhaps, you know, ostensibly the subject matter or the inspiration for it is quite clear. But wondering how you arrived at your particular take on it, and recognizing that this would be your first endeavor as a filmmaker, and why this film and why now?
Yeah, I actually grew up in the visual arts. So I'm still a painter and a drawer and a sculptor and all those things. And, you know, I've been doing theater for over 10 years now. And I've always kept a practice of puppetry on the side, because it's the only way for me as a director to create something without relying on a big team. You know, to me, it's really at the intersection of writing, designing, directing, and performance puppetry. And so with Prometheus, I wanted to create a piece with objects, and I started working on it in 2017. It's the only Greek play that doesn't take place in front of a palace. It takes place on top of a mountain. So I was really compelled by that, and how the character of Prometheus is on trial in a way by nature. So the themes of nature and the environment were the first, what interested me first. And then we were also in the Trump era. So that relationship with Zeus, the tyrannical Zeus, you know, spoke even more to me. And COVID happened, the themes of isolation and loneliness and being on your own, then that really resonated. And I just needed to make it. And I, spent about 3 months in my studio filming the piece. So it was sort of an accumulation of different things that pushed me towards making my first stop motion. I did do another film afterwards. I filmed another play I did in Toronto. So I'm slowly moving towards that medium, which is really exciting.
I think we should all endeavor to have a puppetry practice on the side. I think that's something we should all do. I have my aspiration moving forward post-festival now. I thank you for that. Brendan, your films often hinge upon these attempts at connection, and I think sometimes they play out in very anguished ways. I think of like a film like Bellingham, there's a great sadness to that, or others that do endeavor to approach this on a more comic level. And this seems a film that's really fused those two kind of impetuses for you as a filmmaker, and manages to have its kind of absurdity in its initial moments, or its setup perhaps, and then resolves itself in a very emotionally grounded place. And it is a tonal highway act. And how did you pull it off? Like what did this film end up being something very different from what you perhaps initially conceived it as?
Well, I appreciate you saying that it works. That is very sweet of you. I think, like, for me personally, like, I'm a person who lives in those two different emotional spaces, one of, just kind of the casual, like, longing of human existence to, like, to connect with people, to long for things you don't have, or to long for things you wish you had or don't have anymore. But I've also, like, lived in the space of, like, this really kind of aberrant solitude, these nihilistic thoughts about your own existence and your own social value in the world. And I think I wanted to explore, like, the difference between those two things for my own, like, self-awareness and my own kind of, like, study, and, like, what the two of those look like in opposition to one another. But also to, like, express what it's like to slip from one to the other, because I find it so often starts in one world, and as my thoughts spin and ruminate, you end up in this kind of darker and bleaker place. But the movie actually began kind of like as two separate stories. And then what occurred to me is that I had an interest in doing this compare contrast narrative, and found a way to weave them and intersect them in this kind of weird, desperate, kinky way. So yeah, that was kind of how it came about.
Please be assured it does work, and it works beautifully as well. Rukiya, your film opens with this incredible salvo, if you will, this opening montage in which we, I suppose, see the degradation in some respects of your lead character being asked to run through this gamut of stereotypes. And I believe maybe in your director's statement, you talked about how you wanted to make a film that was about the consequences of stereotypes. And it did. Again, I think, the construction of the film, it begins in one place, it ends in a bit dramatically different as it leads us on the course. And maybe you can just walk us through a little bit your process of the conception of it, but also the writing of it, and obviously bringing the actors into play to execute it. It takes a different form altogether.
Well, my first craft is I'm an actor. I've been an actor for almost 20 years now, and I've worked across Canada. And in that montage scene, I actually picked from previous auditions that I've personally done. And as you know, I wanted to showcase how degrading they are, these stereotypes, but we've all seen these stereotypes portrayed on TV and film. And, I wrote the short as part of an exploration of this feature that I was trying to break. And I never broke the feature, but I was like, oh, but this works quite nicely as a short, to express the point of these stereotypes have real life consequences. And I'm going to segue to another piece where one of my first auditions, I was fresh out of theater school, broke, can't afford rent, and just desperate for a job and just to make it. And I had to audition for this kind of thuggish baby mama type role, like she was in a gang. And it wouldn't have been more than a few lines in the movie of the week that I was auditioning for, but I dressed the part with like the bandana, the baggy clothes, the chains. I had like teardrops that I drew on with my eyeliner, and I was trying to look as thuggish as possible to get the gig. After the audition, I went to the grocery store to pick up, you know, milk, bread, whatever. And the woman at the grocery store followed me. And this is a grocery store that I've shopped at before. And I couldn't understand why she would think of me this way all of a sudden. And I thought it was maybe my attire in combination with being a Black young woman had her just implicitly biased, or maybe not so implicitly, against me, and thinking that I was going to steal something from her. And I thought, how did she learn to think like this? And I thought, well, maybe it's the stuff that she sees on TV every day about people who look like me. I tried making a film in 2019, and everyone was like, oh, it was too heavy and whatnot. And then the following, so I, you know, put it aside. And then in 2020, George Floyd happened, and it was amazing how quickly everyone's consciousness shifted. And I put it out there, and I was supported overwhelmingly. We put out an Indiegogo of $5,000 and tripled our goal. And so that was kind of the genesis of it. The writing of it came from just a need to express something that had been living within me after 20 years of being a performer, and wanting it to be said. And you know, I say that the movie stands on people who have been brutalized by police. Because only then, and George Floyd being the biggest sound of that, allowed the film to live. So it stands on people like his shoulders.
That's beautifully said. Thank you. Charlene, your film was made through Windex Film Festival's Super 8 One Take, and I think for myself as a viewer, there's like a really interesting kind of friction that arrives at it, because it's a bit of a contemplative piece as it plays out. But I think maybe it's born of some urgency, not only from your perspective that suffuses the film, but perhaps also from the way it was made, and recognizing that every second of shooting counts. So while there's a kind of a lyrical narration to it, I think there is this really propulsive feel to the film as well. And maybe if you could speak a little to, you know, maybe not the making of the film, but what got you to that point where you started filming this, and some of the pieces you wanted to address with it.
Yeah, thank you. So I made the film through the One Take Super 8 at the Windex Film Festival, and that's basically where you get a roll of Super 8 film, and you have to film in sequence because you don't get to edit it. And they have a screening, and they screen the films with your audio that you make separately from the process. You don't get to see the film while you're making the sound, and then they go together at the end and they get screened together. Of course, for this, I knew what it was, but it was very interesting because for me, the sound process was really helpful in trying to navigate the way that I was gonna do the voiceover and the narration. When I had made the film, it was a very intimate film for me because I was kind of, you know, dealing with this cycle that I'm constantly going through as an educator and as an artist and as an Indigenous person and as a queer person, of like expectations from others, you know, from your community, from outside of your community, expectations of yourself, and dealing with, like, you know, the repercussions of racism and sexism and colonization, and how that creates like these different emotions within you that like you have to try to navigate and fight between and battle like these different feelings to try to come to the best outcome when you have all these vicious emotions, it's hard to try to do things in a good way all of the time. And so this film is kind of talking about this mental process of figuring out how to deal with the trauma of colonization and these things, and how we can utilize that, hopefully in a good way. And this character that we're following is kind of battling between those different things, and ultimately talking about, the fragments of those emotions and identity and those feelings. And so it was, for me, it was very intimate, but it was also really amazing because I had a crew of all my friends. We were all predominantly women and women of color. And so it was a very safe space to be able to explore these themes and talk about these things. And I feel like without all of this process, the way that it went, it wouldn't have come to fruition. So it was great.
That's fantastic. Dominique, we've talked a little bit about maybe the construction of a few films, and yours opens with the voicemail message, this security camera footage. There's like a lot, and I know you edited the film yourself. It kind of takes us into this world, both your character's personal world through understanding of her family situation, and then a grounding of her physical space as well, where she finds herself in this. And really curious to know from the editing standpoint, your process of kind of just knowing how to bring people into this void, into this space, into this emotional realm that the character is inhabiting, and how long it took you to arrive at kind of that entryway into the story.
Yeah, so from an editing point of view, we had all these different elements to play with. And like I was saying, sort of in my previous question or my previous answer, the space was really a character. And so we really wanted to use as much of the character of the hall, of the venue as we could. And because there's this sort of observational theme through the film, like this girl is being watched. And so we really wanted to use the idea of surveillance and of video camera and of the actual security system to be like the eye watching her, even though she's alone in this space with maybe one other person. It's really, there's this presence that is observing her as she's going about her daily, routine. The voicemail I thought was a really interesting way. I love phone calls. I love how the texture and the sort of intimacy that you can garner from a phone call or a voice message. And that was all sort of crafted through the edit phase. And we knew roughly sort of what these different characters were going to say, but it was height of COVID when I was editing everything. It was all through like the pandemic. And I was so thankful that we had waited to kind of do these phone calls, because it was a really fun way to engage with a lot of people I knew and friends. And then basically would ask people to be these characters, different actors I knew, different friends, to like leave me voicemails as this person to then integrate into this story. Because the idea was this character, Julia, was sort of ignoring and avoiding the world around her. And the only way we could get a glimpse of what was going on behind the scenes were through these missed phone calls, to kind of get an idea that she's just not engaging with anyone. And so it was not only very important for her story, but also just a very fun way to engage with a lot of people during the height of the pandemic. And even the phone calls with the manager. And at the end, there's a phone call as well between the manager and the other person that works there. And that was really fun because we were able to do a whole session through the phone. So I had, one actor and then the other actor and then me, and we were just recording them riffing. And it was a really great way to work together in a time where we were all stuck in our homes. So I think that answers your question, or maybe speaks to it a bit.
It does. It makes me believe that maybe the return of the radio play is imminent as well.
Yeah.
There's hope there. I guess podcasts, right? We have podcasts. But the security cameras really do give that feel of this kind of omniscient force as well, that has a presence in the film. And as I turn to Marie, obviously you spoke already to the figure of Zeus in the film, this kind of patriarchal figure, and the feeling of Prometheus kind of kicking against the patriarchy in this, which I think a lot of the films in this program do have that element of kicking at the forces that are, the oppressive forces that are in play. For yourself, working in, I mean, you had a composer you worked with ultimately, but otherwise it was a very hermetic experience for yourself. And was it, I guess I'm ultimately just curious to know what it was like to work in such an isolated environment for yourself as an artist, and maybe not have feedback into that world. We talk about world building with filmmaking. In this case, you actually had to construct the world as well and inhabit it. But what was it like to just immerse yourself in this space and in this world of the film for 3 months?
It was hard. It was really hard, but I'm really glad I put myself through it. As a director, sometimes I feel we express ourselves through other people in a way, through actors. I mean, you do, as a writer, that's a bit different, but collaboration is so key. And I really had to sit with myself and, step back and sort of give myself notes as a designer and as a performer and a writer. So I would really jump from one role to the other to keep it interesting and sustainable. So I would usually spend 2 to 3 weeks on a scene and build it, and then go back to what I had written, and then shoot it. And sometimes I would shoot the same scene like 2 or 3 times. And if it didn't work, I would, put it aside, go back to another scene, because usually I would unlock something else. And that would happen very quickly. And then I would return to the other scene that I couldn't figure out earlier. So ultimately, when Prometheus is on the mountain, and that's me in the shot. So I shot myself against a wall in all those positions, then printed all of them, cut all of them. So I, cut mini Maries, and then inserted myself in, on top of a mountain that I had created with, it's also a cutout, it's a collage. And that image, which I think is one of my favorite in the movie, I started with it, didn't work, and I finished shooting the movie with that image when it all made sense how it had to work. So that was the process. A lot of, back and forth with myself and different materials. Like I built a ton of different things that didn't work. Yeah, so it was fun. I watched a lot of YouTube videos, building different contraptions to shoot all of the images from different angles. Asked my partner to, hold the camera a bunch of times. And then eventually, it comes together, and I realized that I was going to edit the movie, and then I was like, I actually can't do it. I need someone else to have fresh eyes on this. So that's when I brought, new collaborators on to make sure that they had a little bit of distance with the material.
Brendan, we talked a little bit about the Tonal Highway Act, and there are these kind of disparate elements to the film, some elements of visual humor, I think perhaps of a personal device writhing on the floor at one point, which is, if we talk about indelible images, that is one that sticks with myself from your film. But maybe just, I think that Haley and Samantha's performances obviously are so integral to the film, as we said, working. And did you give them the opportunity to try scenes in different ways, or was there always a matter of making sure that everyone was dialed into what frequency every scene should be broadcasting on?
Actually, yeah, it's Haley and Sam like really surprised me a lot during the movie, because typically in my process, I do a lot of rehearsal and I do a lot of improvisations with the actors, but this was such a different movie. It was much more visually oriented, and there was a big lift for like me and Gail, our cinematographer. So a lot of my focus in like pre-production efforts were focused in a different direction than they are typically. I usually spend so much time with the actors. I obviously spent a lot of time with them, doing text analysis and doing the intimacy coordination work. But when it came to like seeing what the characters were going to be like, and seeing you know, how their actions during the scene were going to conjure different feelings and what they would look like on their faces. Like there was so many times I was really surprised and really deeply moved, especially by Sam, because Sam has never made a film before. And there was just like, I think like one of the things I love so much about cinema is when an actor reveals something to you that maybe you knew subconsciously or like had thought of in some abstract way, but it makes it manifest in like a human face. And I remember we were shooting the scene where the two of them wake up in the morning, and all of Sam's mannerisms around being crestfallen and disappointed and hurt and wounded and trying to hide it, it just like moved me so profoundly. Like I just like you know, I'm a crier on set, Curtis. I don't know if you know this, but I was just like in tears. And so yeah, both of them just like I love the process of discovering what they were doing for the first time on camera. So it's a really great, something different from what I usually do. So it was a joy.
It's a beautiful thing when a film can reveal itself to you in the making of it as well. Rukiya, I wanted to ask you about working with Kia in your film, and I suppose like maybe just the idea of creating a safe or safer space for her and the other actors to work in, because I can only suppose that's probably something you haven't always had the benefit of in your career over 20 years of having a safe space to work in as a performer and being able to execute what's being asked of you. So how did you approach that as a director to make sure that your cast felt supported in what was some tremendously visceral and challenging work you had to do?
Well, I know Kia's work. We were on a TV series, Van Helsing, together, and that was my discovery of her. So I knew that it's one of her first gigs she's ever done was starring in a TV series. So she has that special something about her, the thing that I wish I always had. And so I knew I had to work with her. In terms of creating a safe space, we rehearsed a little bit just to go through the script and make sure that everyone was okay with everything that was going on. Culturally, just various Black cultures, we have an affinity for improv. So even though I wrote the script and labored over every single line, I know that in the moment of a take, if there's an impulse that comes out, go for it. I can cut around it, but usually that's where the magic lies. And because Kia's talent is so raw and natural, I don't want to mess around with it, with her instinct too much. In terms of Kia, she's hadn't done much comedy, so she was really self-conscious about the comedy, and then especially the comedy in the police altercation scene where it's a very, very dark scene, and there's really awkward moments of comedy where my intention as a writer was to provoke the audience to maybe laugh or certainly question themselves if they're having that kind of reaction in that moment. And I just told her, just go for it. And she had the crew cracking up during the montage scene. And after we shot the master of the police altercation scene, all of us were in tears. And that took half a day for us to shoot all the different angles. And every single take, her and Mark Hildreth, who played the cop, just delivered every single time. And I think it was just having a familiarity with each other, a friendship with each other. And I told her, if there's anything that you do not feel comfortable with, you tell me and I will have your back and make sure everyone is on point for her. So she can just fly and do what she does. So that was my process in creating a safe space.
Charlene, I know Rain Vermette features in your film, and she has a film at VIFF this year, St. Anne, as well. Did the two of you talk about how she should kind of occupy this world? We see the advances from her male coworker. We see her move into these other spaces as well, and the various forms of I guess oppressive forces that she faces, both from external forces, but I think also the internal monologue and conflict that she's wrapped up in as well. So for herself as a filmmaker and a performer, were the two of you able to kind of get on a wavelength quite quickly in terms of how she should approach the figure on screen?
Yeah, so we kind of have like an informal collective between like Rain and myself and Amanda Kinzarski and Christiane Church and a bunch of other people that we've made a bunch of films together. And so this was kind of like, we had just started, we had been working a bit on Saint Anne for a bit, and the One Take Super 8 came up and I had this idea. And so I was talking to her about it, and Rain has been a huge mentor to me and supporter. And she was super down to act in it. I was like, I didn't think, I was like, she's not gonna wanna act in it, she's too cool. But she totally did. And it was a great time. The way that I talked to her about the script, because I had written a script, because we had to, you know, be very specific on what we were doing, because everything that we did mattered and it was going to end up in the film. So there was a lot of preparation. We did a lot of rehearsing. We did a lot of, you know, like talking about what it was going to be like. You know, I tried to do as much as I could to time everything, which didn't end up really working in the end. But yeah, I just kind of, you know, talked to her because she has a similar experience. She's a, you know, a Métis woman, and has, you know, had, you know, similar lived experiences to I. So I was just kind of, you know, talking about like, okay, well, like, you know, navigating this world, you know, it's kind of this inner dialogue of navigation of like, how do we move forward? And like, what does that mean for ourselves and the decisions that we're making for the future and also for the past, you know? And so it was really fun. And, you know, I couldn't have asked for a better team. And, you know, she really fell into it quite easily. You know, as soon as we were on set, she was ready to go. And it was really a privilege to work with her.
Well, it's been a privilege to speak to all of you today and to share your work at the festival. We thank you all so much for joining us and for making the films.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you,
Thank
Curtis
you.
and friends.